The International Rescue Committee says Yemen ranks third as dangerous conflict zone in 2021. The giant forces continue to advance in Shabwa and liberate new areas in the city. A recent UN report reveals Iran's involvement in smuggling arms to Houthi militia. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbey. The conflict in Yemen has destroyed the economy of the country and the public health system. In its latest report, the International Rescue Committee Emergency Watch List has ranked Yemen as one of the 3 countries most at risk of deterring humanitarian crises in 2022. This report has more details.
Yemen dropped from the top of the International Rescue Committee's watch list for the first time in 3 years, not because of an improvement in the humanitarian situation, but because crises in other countries are worsening. In 2021, military activities increased in Ma'rib and spread to Al Bayda and Shabwa. In 2022, the Rescues Committee watch list indicated that conflict will persist as diplomatic progress continued to be stymied. Armed conflict could also trigger major violence given the lack of strong incentives to engage in political process. For years, Yemen has been an example of the impact of conflict that has destroyed livelihoods and critical systems people cannot live without. 229 schools and 148 hospitals have been damaged by conflict or used for military purposes since 2015. Economic collapse and the destruction of health, education and others continue to push Yemenis deeper into need. Protests driven by anger in the poor economic situation became increasingly violent in 2021. 15.6 million people are now experiencing extreme poverty. Inflation is growing, with $1 in December 2021 worth 1,670 Yemeni riyals in government-controlled areas. Civil servants such as doctors, teachers and others have not received salaries for years. The watch list revealed that without salaries paid by the government and other humanitarian actors, many of Yemen's existing public systems could collapse entirely. Millions will continue to be food insecure, driven by the collapsing economy. In 2021, the World Food Programme warned that expected to reduce rations for 5 million Yemenis by the end of the year. The organization, responsible for overseeing crises in the world, said that humanitarian's ability to address the needs of Yemeni people will continue to be limited by restrictions on humanitarian access by warring parties. Yemenis therefore welcome 2022 with uncertainty as the conflict-driven economic collapse exacerbates.
Yemeni Chief of Staff General Saghir bin Aziz confirmed that the government forces and the resistance have scored great military victories on the southern fronts of Ma'rib. General bin Aziz said the military advances made by the government forces in the battles of Ma'rib inflicted heavy losses on the militia, especially in Juba. He outlined that 80% of the Houthi rebels' abilities have been destroyed, noting that the government forces aims at destroying all Houthi capabilities before declaring any victory. To that end, the commander of the 3rd Military Zone, Brigadier Mansour Sawab, said the government forces will keep advancing in Ma'rib until they come together with giant brigades who are advancing from neighboring Shabwa. In Shabwa, the giant spur gates have reached the center of Ain district. Ain district is the last in Shabwa under the control of the Houthi militia, and by entering Ain, the government forces will declare the liberation to the whole governorate of Shabwa. Along with the advance of the giant forces to Ain district, the Houthi militia deployed its snipers on many sites and mountains. A local source confirmed that during the past 24 hours, the militias deployed dozens of their militants in newly developed locations and hideouts on the heights of Ain district. The terrorist Houthi militia targeted populated areas in western Shabwa. Local sources said a missile fired by the Houthi militia landed in a workshop in the city of Al-Ula in the center of Bayhan district. They said the missile caused great material damage and did not result in casualties. The Houthi militia blew up the bridges located in Nu'man district to prevent any advance of the forces of the giant brigades in Al-Bayda near to Shabwa. Local sources said the bombing of the bridges came after the rapid advance of the giant forces towards the center of Nata district in Al-Bayda from the direction of Bayhan district in Shabwa. The Yemeni Landmine Observatory warned the displaced residents of Usaylan and Bayhan districts in Shabwa against any return to their homes. In the same context, the observatory said 5 people were killed and others injured during the past 2 days as a result of mines in Usaylan. To the west coast, 11 Houthi militants were killed and 7 others were injured in a shelling by the government forces in Taz and Hodeidah. In Taz, 2 Houthi crews were destroyed in Maqbana, killing 8 of the militants. In Al-Jarahi, south of Hodeidah, 3 militants were killed after destroying their vehicle. The coalition said it carried out 57 operations against the militia in Ma'rib and Shabwa during the past 24 hours. 15 operations were carried out against the militia in Ma'rib and 39 operations in Shabwa. The coalition added that the strikes in Ma'rib killed 65 Houthis and destroyed 11 military vehicles and communication sites, while the raids in Shabwa killed nearly 290 Houthis and destroyed 30 military vehicles. Iran's support to the Houthi militia has become known with the confession of Iranian officials themselves. Every time and then we come across a report or a study that confirms it. In the same context, a recent UN report found that thousands of weapons recently seized in the Arabian Sea came from a single port in Iran, which shows Tehran is exporting arms to Houthi rebels. This report has more details.
The United Nations found evidence that thousands of weapons recently seized in the Arabian Sea likely came from a single port in Iran, which shows Tehran exporting arms to Yemen and elsewhere, the Wall Street Journal reported Saturday. Yemen has been racked by civil war since 2014. The United Nations imposed an arms embargo on Houthis in 2015. The United States and Saudi Arabia, which led the military coalition back in the Yemeni government, have long accused Iran of supplying the Houthis with weapons, a charge Tehran denies. Citing a confidential report by a United Nations Security Council panel of experts on Yemen, the Wall Street Journal wrote that sea and land transport were used to smuggle weapons made in Russia, China, and Iran into Yemen. The arms included rocket launchers, machine guns, and sniper rifles, which had been seized by the U.S. Navy in recent months. Boats used to transport the weapons had left from the southeastern Iranian port of Shask. The Saudi-led military coalition on Saturday accused Houthi rebels again and their Iranian backers of using 2 Red Sea ports for military purposes. The Houthis captured the Rawabi ship on Monday of the key rebel-held Red Sea port of Hodeidah, alleging it contained military material. The ship is being detained in the Houthi-held port of Salif, north of Hodeidah, both of which are crucial entry points for aid supplies. On Tuesday, the coalition said Yemen's rebel-held ports would be considered legitimate military targets unless the vessel was freed. Recent months, fighting in Yemen has seen coalition forces carry out airstrikes on Houthi militia targets in the capital Sana'a. Riyadh has said its 2015 intervention in Yemen was aimed at restoring the legitimate government and preventing an Iranian proxy from taking power on its doorstep. The United Nations estimates that Yemen war will have directly or indirectly killing more than 370,000 people by the end of the year. More than 80% of the population of around 30 million require humanitarian assistance.
The Center for Counseling and Psychological Research in Taz University started a program to reduce anxiety and enhance psychological immunity in children.
We have been trained by experts in coordination with British and Canadian organizations. The program aims at solidifying the psychological immunity in the children through activities that enable the child to overcome his worries.
A program was launched to decrease anxiety in children who are suffering from the trauma of war and armed conflicts. Targeting children is aimed at the community as a whole. It is a world-class one that suits all age categories. We aim at decreasing pressures, anxiety and worry through solidifying psychological immunity in children. In the schools of Taz, training was given to more than 20 experts to apply this program.
Coming next. In the midst of hard living conditions, a charity bakery was started in Atak to help needy families.
اضطرينا نحن نغادر من ذي وزحنا.
الله يستنقذكم يا محولتني لا الله يستنقذ.
Welcome back. Since the start of the conflict in March 2015, human rights violations and abuses against journalists have increased in Yemen. These abuses include killings, enforced disappearance, abduction, and physical assaults. The year 2022 witnessed also further violations. This report has more details.
The year 2021 turned its record and many violations were committed against journalists in Yemen, which amounted to 104 cases of violations affecting media outlets, journalists, and photographers, and the looting of their possessions since the beginning of January until the end of December of the same year. The Houthi areas represented in the first place an unsafe and more hostile environment for journalists, according to the statement of the Yemeni Journalists Syndicate and the annual report on media freedom. The violations were distributed among 30 cases of freedom detention, 19 cases of prevention and confiscation of journalists and their belongings, 12 cases of threats and incitement, 12 cases of trial, 11 cases of assault, 6 cases of depriving detained journalists from the right to medical care, 5 cases of torture, 5 cases of suspension of media and journalists' entitlements, and 4 cases of murder. The Houthis alone committed 46 cases of violations out of the total violations, while other parties committed the rest against journalists, and there are still 14 journalists detained by different parties, including 12 journalists with the Houthi group, some of whom the group issued unfair sentences to death. With regard to prevention and confiscation, the syndicate recorded 19 cases, including 10 cases of prevention of press coverage, 4 cases of banning from visiting the kidnapped journalists, 3 cases of confiscation of photojournalist cameras, 2 confiscation of journalist cars, 6 cases of deprivation of the abductees from the right to health care, and 5 cases of torture of abductees. Many journalists and foreign media correspondents complain about the restrictions imposed by the Houthi militia on journalistic work. through illegal internal regulations that impose restrictions, control, and sums of money on media work, in light of continuous calls to save the press and journalists in Yemen, and to stop the policies practiced by the terrorist group to target the press and journalists' respect for freedom of opinion and expression. Journalists are suffering in Yemen due to Houthi violations. They are being deprived from the right of living a decent life, and no one knows when will that end.
Houthi escalation has aggravated the humanitarian crisis in the country. Thousands of people left their homes and headed to other places to seek shelter. This report has more details.
Houthi rebels continue their military escalation that deepens suffering of Yemenis. International reports show that their military escalation and hostilities has killed, injured children, women and men, and caused displacement of about 3,000 Yemenis during the past week. It also deepened suffering of 5 million people who are one step away from famine. This military escalation coincides with relief organizations' warnings from funding shortages and calls for increased funding to continue relief operations in war-torn Yemen. The International Organization for Migration stated that about 3,000 Yemenis fled their homes during the past week as Houthi rebels continue to escalate on more than one front, while the total number of displaced people increased during the past year to more than 150,000 individuals. Between December 26, 2021 and January 1, 2022, 466 families were displaced at least once. The UN agency said that conflict was the main cause of displacement, accounting for 94%, followed by economic causes at 6%. From January 1, 2021 and January 1, 2022, 26,227 families, or some 157,362 individuals, were displaced at least once in the first update of the current year. The UN Migration indicated that overcrowded sites for displaced people are still receiving newly displaced families. The UN Migration indicated that 4 to 5 families often share 2 tents, while others have moved to farms and open spaces where humanitarian services are intermittent or non-existent. The organization said that the urgent funding requirements amount to $10 million, noting that the largest needs in displacement sites are shelter, non-food items, education services and water, sanitation and hygiene services. Meanwhile, the United Nations Children's Fund confirmed that 10,000 children have been killed in Yemen since March 2015, with the equivalent of 4 children per day, although the numbers could be higher. According to UNICEF, the largest monthly number of civilian casualties was calculated during the third quarter in September 2021, when 233 civilian casualties were reported, including 67 deaths. UNICEF received a total of $285.3 million, leaving a funding gap of 44% of the total amount required to continue life-saving work in Yemen. Civilians in Yemen are still bearing the burden of Houthis' war, as they continue rejecting all peace proposals.
A charity bakery has been opened in Ataq in Shabwa. The idea behind this project is to help provide poor families with bread and roti. This initiative was started by young people, and they asked the local authority to support it. This report has more details.
In the city of Atak, the first investment bakery for charitable work was opened in Shabwa Governorate, which will provide a number of poor families with their daily needs of a loaf of bread to relieve them of the hardship of searching for the basic sustenance of life.
This charity bakery is an idea from young people. Currently, we've nearly 100 poor families to distribute to them, which corresponds to 3,000 roti bread daily, and hopefully this number increases. Of course, the idea of this bakery is mainly to help families, poor families, and also to pay the rent of the bakery, salaries of workers in it. We also ask the local authority and non-profit organizations to support this bakery.
This bakery, which is adopted by the young people of Shabwa, which started to distribute 4,000 loaves of bread for poor people, was created in response to the strong people's need for basic requirements of life, which has been forced by the hard living conditions they face, within charitable endeavors aimed at confronting the specter of hunger that exhausted the stomachs of many members of the needy families who are unable to secure the minimum needs of food due to the economic collapse.
We have standards for distributing to families in need. We distribute to nearly 4,000 individuals. Each one has 2 loaves of bread in the morning and another and 2 in the evening. The charity work is still continuing, and if we receive more flour and any sort of charitable support from people who love to help, we can increase the number of families we distribute to.
We invite all people who are working in this charity organizations and in this governorate and also local authorities to support this project in order not to stop, as it is not a commercial project but rather a consuming one.
The people of Yemen have suffered long enough, and the war is increasing their suffering more and more. The continuity of this project depends on the local community initiatives and the people who are willing to support others who cannot afford to buy their basic needs to live. Hopefully, this project can be a start for easing the pain of all Yemenis, which is increasing day by day.
The Yemeni rial recorded a loss against foreign currencies in Aden for the second time in less than a week. Banking sources in Aden said the dollar purchase jumped to 1,181 riyals, while the selling value reached 1,250 riyals. Last December, the value of the US dollar fell to less than 900 riyals. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The International Rescue Committee says Yemen ranks third as dangerous conflict zone in 2021. The giant forces continue to advance in Shabwa and liberate new areas in the city. A recent UN report reveals Iran's involvement in smuggling arms to Houthi militia. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching.